Be me 22, in that weird phase of life where you think you have everything figured out. In college, studying something that sounded important when I signed up but feels kind of useless now. Still living at home with my parents. It was supposed to be a temporary thing to save money, but rent prices are a joke, and my part-time job at a campus coffee shop barely covers gas and textbooks. My life basically revolves around three things: classes, my boyfriend Paul, and my deeply held social theories that I share with anyone who will listen, and many who won't. My main theory, the one I'd built a lot of my personality around, was simple. Modern men have forgotten how to be men. They don't want responsibility. They're stuck in a perpetual state of adolescence. Peter Pan syndrome, but with more vape pens and crypto scams. My evidence was everywhere I looked. Exhibit A, my boyfriend Paul. Paul was 23, incredibly charming, and had the professional ambition of a golden retriever. He was an aspiring something or other. Last month it was a music producer. This month it was a day trader. Next month, who knew? Maybe a gourmet mushroom farmer. His parents paid his rent for his downtown apartment, a place that was way nicer than my childhood bedroom. He talked a big game about hustle and grinding, but his days were mostly spent playing video games and waiting for the right opportunity to fall into his lap. I saw him not as a failure, but as a victim of a society that didn't properly motivate men. I was trying to fix him, I guess. Then there was Exhibit B, my father, Frank. My dad was the polar opposite of Paul, but in my mind, they were two sides of the same irresponsible coin. He was in his early 50s, worked a boring but stable office job for some logistics company, has been there since forever. He was a relic of a bygone era, the strong, silent type. So silent, in fact, that dinner conversations were often just me talking while he stared at his plate. He wasn't lazy like Paul, but he was passive. He had given up. He'd come home from work, the energy completely drained from him, slump into his old recliner, and watch TV until he fell asleep. He never talked about his feelings. He never had grand ambitions. He just existed. His idea of responsibility was purely financial. Pay the mortgage, keep the lights on. But what about emotional responsibility? What about personal growth? In my eyes, he had checked out of life. He was a provider, a human ATM, but not a participant. This was a constant source of friction between us. I remember one evening, a few months back. I was on a roll at the dinner table. I was explaining the concept of weaponized incompetence to my mom, using Paul's inability to cook anything more complex than toast as an example. My mom was half listening, looking tired herself. She'd been tired a lot lately, more doctor's appointments than usual. She always brushed it off as nothing. I turned to my dad, looking for some kind of validation. It's like men just pretend to be bad at things so they don't have to do them. It's a huge problem. My dad just kept cutting his steak. Didn't even look up. "I'm sure it is," he said, his voice flat. That was it. No debate, no engagement. Just a conversational dead end. It made me furious. You don't see it, do you? You're from a generation that just accepted these roles. You clock in, you clock out. You don't engage. You don't try to be better. He finally put his knife and fork down and looked at me. His eyes were heavy. Deeper bags under them than I remembered. "I'm tired, Lauren, that's all. See, that's the excuse. Everyone's tired. But some people still show up. They still take responsibility for their own happiness, their own lives." He just shook his head slowly, picked up his fork, and went back to eating. The silence was a victory in my mind. He couldn't even defend himself. I had won the argument. My worldview felt solid, impenetrable. The weeks that followed only seemed to prove my point. My mom had what she called a minor procedure. She was home for a week, mostly resting in bed. My dad took a few days off work to take care of her. I saw him carrying trays of food to her room, making sure she took her medicine. I interpreted this through my cynical lens. This was his comfort zone, simple, physical tasks, no complex emotional engagement required, just follow the doctor's instructions. Meanwhile, I had to deal with Paul, who had a meltdown because his internet was down for a whole afternoon. He called me 3 times to complain about how he couldn't work on his portfolio, which I knew meant he couldn't play his online game. I spent an hour on the phone with him, talking him down, being his emotional support animal. The contrast was stark. My dad, performing basic duties. Me, managing the fragile ego of a man-child. I felt so burdened. The family car, an old but reliable sedan, started making a terrible noise. I overheard my parents talking about it in hushed tones in the kitchen. The word transmission was used. I knew that was an expensive word. I expected my dad to do the responsible thing, take it to a mechanic, pay the bill, maybe complain about the cost. Instead, the next Saturday, he was in the garage. I woke up to the sound of clanging metal and the smell of oil. I went out there and saw him, flat on his back on a piece of cardboard, sliding under the car. He was covered in grease. His tools, old and worn, were scattered all over the concrete floor. He spent the entire weekend out there. I remember bringing him a glass of water at one point. He slid out from under the car, his face smeared with black grime, his knuckles bloody. "Why don't you just take it to a shop, Dad?" I asked, a little disgusted by the sight. "That's what they're for." He took the water and drank the whole glass in one go. "Shops cost money," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of a greasy hand. "This just costs time." I didn't get it. He had a decent job. We weren't poor. It felt like martyrdom. Like he was deliberately choosing the hardest, most inconvenient path to prove some kind of old-fashioned point about self-reliance. I went inside and texted Paul about it. "My dad is literally spending his entire weekend torturing himself under a car to save a few $100. It's such a boomer mindset. His time has to be worth more than that." Paul texted back almost instantly. "Totally. It's like they think suffering is a virtue. My dad's the same. Anyway, you want to come over? I'm ordering pizza." The difference was so clear. Paul understood modern efficiency. My dad was stuck in the past, clinging to a dusty, broken-down version of masculinity. The car was running again by Sunday evening. My dad came inside, looking 10 years older than he did on Friday morning. He took the longest shower I'd ever heard, and when he came out for dinner, he ate 2 full plates of food without saying a word, and then fell asleep in his chair before 8 p.m. My mom just looked at him with this sad expression and put a blanket over him. I felt a flicker of something, maybe pity, but I quickly stamped it out. This was his choice. He was choosing to be this tired, this disconnected. Things got tighter after that. I didn't have the full picture, just little clues. My mom started using coupons for groceries, which she hadn't done in years. The thermostat was always set a little lower than I liked. When I asked my dad for some money for a new pair of boots I needed for the winter, there was a long pause. He pulled out his wallet, which looked thinner than usual, and gave me the cash. But he didn't look at me when he did it. It felt like I'd done something wrong. My resentment grew. I felt like I was living in a house full of secrets and unspoken anxieties. Why couldn't he just talk about it? If money was an issue, why not say so? His silence felt like a failure of leadership, a failure of fatherhood. He was supposed to be the rock, the one who had it all under control. Instead, he seemed to be crumbling, and he was doing it silently, dragging us all down with him. My relationship with Paul was also starting to strain. His day trading phase ended with him losing a few $100s of his parents' money. He was devastated. Not about the money, but about the failure. I was the one who had to piece his ego back together over long, rambling phone calls. I told him it wasn't his fault, that the market was unpredictable, that he was brave for even trying. All the while, a little voice in the back of my head was starting to whisper. It whispered about how my dad had never once called me to complain about his job. It whispered about how he just got up every single day and went to work, no matter how tired he was. It whispered about how he fixed the car with his own 2 hands, while my boyfriend couldn't even fix himself a sandwich. I told the voice to shut up. It was more complex than that. My dad was emotionally stunted. Paul was emotionally open. That was the difference. The breaking point came on a Friday night. It must have been late October or early November, because the air had that cold, sharp bite to it. Paul had a rare win. One of his DJ mixes got played on some small, independent online radio station. To celebrate, he wanted to go out with his friends to some club downtown. I was invited, of course. I didn't really want to go. I had a big paper due on Monday, but Paul was so excited, so for once he wasn't a black hole of neediness. I felt obligated to go and celebrate with him. I got home from my coffee shop job around 9 p.m. My dad was already asleep in his chair. The TV was on, casting a flickering blue light across his slack face. My mom was in the kitchen, packing up some leftovers. She looked pale. "He had a long week," she said, nodding towards my dad. "He's been so tired." "He's always tired," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I went to my room to get ready. As I was putting on makeup, I felt a wave of anger. This was my life. A sleeping father, a worried mother, a boyfriend who required constant validation. I felt like the only real adult in the house. The party was exactly what you'd expect. Loud music, overpriced drinks, and Paul's friends who were all clones of him, full of talk, empty of action. Paul was in his element, the center of attention for a few fleeting hours. I just stood there, nursing a single drink, feeling disconnected from all of it. We left around 1:30 a.m. Paul was drunk and happy. He asked me to drive his car back to his place. On the way, he suddenly got a craving for a specific brand of energy drink that he claimed was the only cure for a future hangover. "Dude, you gotta stop at a convenience store," he slurred, pointing vaguely at the street ahead. "I need a Blue Volt, like, medically." I sighed and pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour convenience store. It was one of those generic, brightly lit places that feel a little sad and desperate in the middle of the night. "I'll be right back," he said, fumbling with the door handle. "Don't go anywhere." I watched him stumble into the store. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes, the bass from the club still throbbing in my ears. I was so tired, not just tired from the party, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Tired of Paul, tired of my dad, tired of the stupid theories I used to make sense of my life. After a minute, I opened my eyes and looked towards the store. Paul was at the counter, talking the ear off the poor cashier. My gaze drifted past him, towards the back of the store. The aisles were clean, unnaturally so for this time of night. The floor gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. And that's when I saw him. There was a man in a plain blue custodian's uniform, pushing a large yellow mop bucket. He was working methodically, mopping the floor in long, even strokes, his back to the front of the store. There was something familiar about the way he moved, the slight stoop of his shoulders, the set of his head. I watched him as he finished a section and turned to start on the next one. His profile was illuminated by the light from the refrigerated drink section. My heart stopped. It felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. It was my father. I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel. It was like my brain had short-circuited. The world outside the car window turned into a silent movie. I saw the cheap blue uniform, the kind of thing you don't even notice. It's designed to make the person wearing it invisible. I saw the slow, deliberate way he pushed the mop, a rhythm born of exhaustion, not efficiency. He wasn't just a man cleaning a floor. He was my father. A group of teenagers, loud and obnoxious, burst into the store, running right over the section he had just finished mopping. They left a trail of dirty footprints on the glistening floor. I watched my dad. He didn't even look up. He didn't sigh. He didn't show any sign of frustration. He just waited for them to pass, then calmly started mopping the same spot all over again. The complete and total lack of ego in that moment was staggering. The car door swung open, and Paul flopped into the passenger seat, the smell of stale beer and artificial fruit filling the small space. "Success," he announced, holding up a bright blue can. "The nectar of the gods." That cashier was a total weirdo, was telling me about his pet lizard. He was laughing, completely oblivious. He glanced over at me. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot. "Whoa, easy there, speed racer," he said. The entire drive to his apartment was a blur. He kept talking, rambling about the party, about his friends, about his plans for the weekend. It was all just noise, white noise, like a radio playing in another room. I was trapped in the image of my father, under those horrible fluorescent lights. I dropped Paul off at his building. He leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head, so he just got my cheek. "You're acting weird," he said, pouting a little. "Text me tomorrow." I just nodded and drove away. I didn't go straight home. I drove around for what felt like hours, my mind racing. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe his company had a contract to clean their own properties? No, that made no sense. He worked in logistics. Maybe he was helping out a friend who owned the store. Unlikely at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Every logical explanation I came up with felt flimsy and stupid. The simplest answer was the most impossible one. My father was working a second job as a nighttime janitor. I finally got home close to 3 a.m. The house was dark and silent. I crept up to my room and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every single conversation, every single argument I'd had with him over the past year came flooding back to me. Me lecturing him about emotional labor and personal fulfillment. Me criticizing him for being tired and disengaged. Me rolling my eyes as he spent a whole weekend fixing the car, calling him a boomer for not wanting to pay a mechanic. The shame was a physical thing. It felt like a hot, heavy weight pressing down on my chest. My father wasn't passive. He wasn't checked out. He was fighting a war I didn't even know existed, and he was doing it completely alone in silence. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I came downstairs looking and feeling like a zombie. My dad was at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper, just like any other Saturday. He looked exactly the same as always, tired, quiet, but now I saw it all differently. The dark circles under his eyes weren't just from age. The slight tremor in his hand as he lifted his coffee mug wasn't just a random tick. It was exhaustion. Deep, profound, cellular exhaustion. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. What could I possibly say? He went out to do yard work later that morning. I waited until I saw his car pull away from his main job, knowing he'd be gone for most of the day. I found my mom in the living room, folding laundry. I sat down on the couch across from her. I didn't know how to start. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Is everything okay with money?" She looked up, her expression guarded. "Everything's fine, honey. Why do you ask?" "Don't lie to me, please." I told her what I saw. I told her about the convenience store, the blue uniform, the mop. As I spoke, her face crumpled. She put the laundry basket down and started to cry, silent tears running down her cheeks. And then the whole story came out. It started about a year ago. Her health problems, which she had always downplayed as minor, were actually a chronic condition, a serious one. The treatments were expensive. The specialist visits, the medication, the therapies. The bills were piling up faster than they could pay them. The insurance covered a lot, but not all of it. The gap was a few $1,000s every month. They had burned through their savings pretty quickly. They had taken out a second mortgage on the house. My dad had gotten a small raise at his job, but it wasn't nearly enough. So, about 6 months ago, he had started looking for a second job. It was hard. He was in his 50s. Nobody wants to hire a middle-aged office worker for part-time gigs. The only thing he could find that fit around his main job schedule was a position with a commercial cleaning company that serviced retail stores and offices at night. He worked his 9 to 5 at the logistics company. He would come home, have dinner, maybe rest for an hour. Then, 4 nights a week, he would leave around 10 p.m. and work until 3 or 4 in the morning. "He didn't want you to know," my mom said through her tears. He was so ashamed. Ashamed? Why? He felt like he was failing. He said his one job in life was to provide for us, to make sure you had it better than he did. He didn't want you to have to worry about this. He just wanted you to focus on college, to have a normal life. Every word was another nail in the coffin of my arrogance. My father wasn't ashamed. He was noble, the car repair. He didn't do it to be cheap. He did it because a $1,000 mechanic's bill would have been a catastrophe. The quiet dinners. He wasn't being passive-aggressive. He was so tired he could barely form a sentence. His silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a shield, built to protect me from the ugly reality of our situation. I sat there with my mom for a long time. We didn't talk much more. There was nothing left to say. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Paul. "Hey, are you still mad at me? I'm really sorry if I was annoying last night. My dad's being a total jerk. He won't give me the startup money for my new podcast idea. He just doesn't believe in me. I could really use someone to talk to." I read the message and I felt nothing. No anger, no sympathy. Just a profound sense of distance. It was like I was looking at a message from a different lifetime. His problems, which just 24 hours ago had seemed so important, were now laughably insignificant. He was a child, complaining that his toys were broken, while my father was literally breaking his own back in the dead of night to keep our world from falling apart. I typed out a reply. "I'm sorry, I can't. We shouldn't see each other anymore." He immediately started calling me. I declined the call. He sent a flurry of texts. What did I mean? Why? Was it something he did? I turned my phone off. I didn't have the energy to explain a reality he would never be able to comprehend. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, I wasn't wrestling with confusion. I was waiting. At 3:15 a.m., I heard the faint click of the front door. I slipped out of my room and went downstairs. He was in the kitchen. He hadn't turned the main light on, just the small one above the stove. He was leaning against the counter, his eyes closed. He was still in his work pants from his office job, but he had on a plain gray t-shirt. He looked so utterly defeated. He opened his eyes and saw me standing there. A flash of panic crossed his face. He thought he'd been caught. I didn't say a word. I walked over to the cabinet, took out a mug, and put a tea bag in it. I filled the electric kettle with water and turned it on. We just stood there in the quiet hum of the kitchen, not looking at each other. When the kettle clicked off, I poured the hot water into the mug and slid it across the counter to him. He looked down at the mug, then he looked up at me. His eyes were filled with a million emotions I had never seen before. Exhaustion, fear, relief, and gratitude. I saw the weight of his secret life, the burden he had been carrying all by himself, and he saw in my eyes that I finally understood. He picked up the mug, his hands trembling slightly, and took a sip. "Thanks," he whispered. His voice was hoarse. That was all we said. But in that one word, everything changed. Things got different after that night. The next Monday, I went to my college's student employment office and found a job working in the library, shelving books. It was only 15 hours a week, but it was something. I started making dinner a few nights a week, so when my parents came home, there was a hot meal waiting for them. I took every penny I earned from my 2 part-time jobs and gave it to my mom. I told her it was for groceries. We both knew what it was really for. I deleted my social media accounts. All those posts, all those theories about toxic masculinity and the failings of modern men, they seemed so childish and cruel now. I was ashamed I had ever written them. My relationship with my father changed completely. We still didn't talk much about feelings. It wasn't his way. But the silence was different now. It was comfortable, full of unspoken understanding. A few months later, on a Saturday morning, I looked out the window and saw him in the driveway, the hood of the old sedan up again. I put on an old sweatshirt and went outside. He looked up as I approached, a question in his eyes. "What looks like the problem this time?" I asked. He gave me a small, tired smile. "Alternator, I think." "Show me," I said. I spent the whole afternoon out there with him. I didn't know the first thing about cars. I mostly just handed him wrenches and held the flashlight. But I was there. He would point to different parts of the engine, explaining what they did in his simple, direct way. He talked more that afternoon than he had in the past 5 years. And for the first time in my life, I just shut up and listened.